Hi folks, I'm Spencer, and on today's episode of Cult Mania, we're talking about soundtracks. Because we can. Now, anyone who has been on this channel before will know that I'm a big soundtrack fan. I always try to dedicate some time in a review to discuss the soundtrack, often saying it's really cool because I love movie soundtracks really. I've always loved collecting soundtracks. I think the first vinyl I ever bought was Drive. And at the moment, with work, I'm struggling to watch as many films, so I thought, well, I've been listening to a lot of soundtracks, let's do a video on that then. All of the soundtracks I'm going to discuss in this video are ones that I really love. They aren't like a top 10, there are 10 of them, but they're not my top 10 soundtracks of all time. They're just ones I really like, they're ones that I think are unique or different, and they're all ones that are from things that I've not really talked about before. I didn't want to go over soundtracks that I've reviewed before as part of movie reviews. So again, I may review these films again down the line and discuss the soundtracks then, but this is sort of just about soundtracks because soundtracks are really good. So the first soundtrack that we are talking about today is Clint Mansell's score for The Fountain. This is the only score on here where I've listened to the score loads and loads of times, haven't actually seen the film. That sounds really weird. In part that's because I'm a huge Clint Mansell fan, and I think, you know, he's done some fantastic work, and it was very, very difficult actually to pick a favourite. Moon was very, very close to being on this list, but I went for The Fountain purely because I discovered this when I went to see Clint perform a bunch of the scores live, and it was when he did the stuff from The Fountain. I think he did Death is the Road to War, and it was just one of the most sort of rapturous, emotional moments that I can remember in any live concert I've been to, and it made me just go home and I just wanted to listen to the soundtrack. I just wanted to hear everything else, and I think it's one of the most emotive pieces of music ever. I think it's so good for that reason, and there's part of me that doesn't actually want to see the film because I've constructed all of these scenes in my head based around the music, and I don't kind of want that ruined. I just think it builds such a picture in the way that music is done. I think that's in part helped because Mogwai, the Scottish post-rock band, did parts of this music as well. They were part of the process, and I think they understand emotion in music so much as well. And you have Kronos Quartet on there as well that Clint had worked with on Requiem for a Dream, so you've got that perfect relationship going there. It just, the way like the strings work on this soundtrack are just, they're so beautiful, and I think there is so much power and just a breadth of emotion in there. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I love the soundtrack and I don't even know the film. It's just a brilliant piece of music in general. Yeah, go and listen to it. Another score that I absolutely love, it's another very modern one. A lot of these on this list I noticed were very modern. I'll have to do a more sort of classic list down the line. But another modern score that I really, really love is Cliff Martinez's score for Only God Forgives, which I would hold up if I owned. I'm very annoyed that I don't own it, especially because it's now very expensive to buy physically. That's annoying. This was, again, very hotly contested for my Nick Refn, Cliff Martinez score slot, because Neon Demon was actually what I originally picked, but I changed it at the last minute for Only God Forgives, because I mean, both scores are fantastic. Both do very similar things. They both have these very sort of dancey moments, these very big, loud, brash moments, and quieter, actually very pretty sounding moments. But I think Only God Forgives is a really unique score, and I think often gets overshadowed by Drive because it was so close to it, and I think everyone was expecting another Drive score, and that's not what you get. And that's in part because there are these fantastic elements of Thai music, both in that there are songs sung in Thai. You have, those weird karaoke moments that pop up in the film that are brilliant, A, because they're very, very strange, and also I love hearing different types of music in different languages from different cultures, and Thai love songs sung in a karaoke style is awesome. But also there's Thai influence, there's a lot of cool drums. I think some of the way the strings are arranged on the score have that sort of Eastern vibe to them. And I mean, it's predominantly very synth based, and there are just some absolute bops on here. I do have a 7-inch somewhere with Bride of Chang and Wanna Fight, which are two of the most awesome pieces on the soundtrack. They do almost sound like you could put them on in a club and they would work incredibly well. But no, I think the key thing with the score for this is Only God Forgives is it's a 90-minute film that is incredibly slow, has barely any dialogue, and I can understand why people hate it for that reason. But I think the score tells you so much of the story. It sort of adds a momentum to the film that the sort of glacial acting doesn't. It sort of keeps you moving. It's propelling the plot, it's propelling the story, and it's just adding to certain scenes, because whilst things on screen might be happening quite slowly, the score is actually adding tempo. And I think it's really important for that reason. It's one of those... The film wouldn't work without the score being the way it is. It builds a sense of world. It, like I said, it adds that momentum. It's just a really, really good score. And like I said, I'm really annoyed that I don't own the vinyl. Can we have a repress of it, please? If someone out there has the rights. Yeah, that would be good, wouldn't it? While we're discussing films that I wish I had on vinyl and for some reason don't, The Wicker Man. The Wicker Man is the best movie musical of all time. I know that sounds weird, but I do count it as a musical because people actually sing the songs in it in the film, and they're awesome. Paul Giamatti wrote fantastic, fantastic songs for this film. I do think, I think the score in and of itself, with its, sort of very country acoustic-y guitars, flutes, that sort of thing, the sort of bassy drums, that stuff all works really well and is incredibly influential. There aren't many films that are like The Wicker Man that don't sound like it. Even something more recent on Midsummer is, although very different, is borrowing a lot of elements from it. Something like The Third Day as well had Wicker Man influences and has those elements to the score, even though they've been remixed and reworked in a different manner. And I mean, that stuff works really well, but it's the songs. Corn Rigs literally just gets stuck in my head. It's too catchy for its own good, really. But it's, the Maypole song, Landlord's Door, they all have this very authentic feel. They do feel like something that if you went to somewhere like Summerisle, they are what you would hear. And I think it really helps build the world again. In a similar way, actually, to Only God Forgives. It does give you that sense of place. And the songs are really fun. They're quite funny in places. I think that film has a genuine, really funny streak to it. And I think the songs have that as well. They're also really horny. And you can tell that they were just having a lot of fun writing those songs, because they're a joy to listen to. And they're so creative, and no, it's a really special soundtrack and a very unique one. And yeah, it's best movie musical ever. You can get it on vinyl. I don't know why I don't really. Right, so that brings me on to basically we're going to get a bit weirder from here on out, and I'm going to go next with the score for Firewalk with Me. I mean, what do you do when you have created one of the most iconic pieces of TV ever with some of the most iconic music for TV that, you know, is so you can't see the images of Twin Peaks without hearing the soundtrack, without hearing the main theme or Laura's theme or Audrey's dance. It's all so tied in. What do you do when you've got to make that more cinematic? You've got to make it bigger, even though you've just made TV more cinematic as a whole. If you're David Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti, you make everything really, really weird. I mean, yes, there are connections to the TV score. I think the instrumentation has, similarities. I think the main theme for the movie ties in quite nicely with something like Laura's theme. It has similar instrumentation, general sort of tone. You have the Julie Cruz songs that sort of connect the two. But it's so wholly different in other ways. The Pink Room theme with its sort of thundering rock and roll guitar that it just begs you to play incredibly, incredibly loud is so different to anything that turns up in the show Twin Peaks, and does just set it apart as being something different. You have the complete oddity that is The Black Dog Runs at Night, which is just a voice saying that over some very, very sort of low-end bass. And it's like, you wouldn't score anything with this, let alone, I'm pretty sure it's like the little weird kid that looks like David Lynch jumping around in a puddle or something. That's not what you'd score that with, but it's awesome. And that's why David Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti are brilliant together. You have that really strange, poetic, hip-hoppy thing that is a real indication that, the lyrics are written by Lynch, and it's odd and used in a really like sort of normal scene. Where is this coming from? But I think it's all testament to the fact that Lynch, Badalamenti, everyone on that show perhaps was disappointed with how season 2 went, that it had lost its oddness, it lost its lynchiness up until those last couple of episodes where he came back. And I think, it's a mission statement of that film to go, okay, we're taking you back into the weirdness, we're taking you back into just pure Lynch levels. And I think the score is a huge part of that, because it's a departure, it's weird, it doesn't care that certain fans were going to hate it. I mean, fans did hate it. Fans hated that score, probably. Fans hated that film, definitely. Lots of people hated that film. And it's brilliant. But it's a really ballsy film with a really, really ballsy score. And I think it's the best score for a Lynch project in total. And I didn't think that when I first heard it. I was disappointed by the film. I was disappointed by the score. And now it's my favourite. There was another Lynch that was very, very close to being on the list, but I'm going to save that for another video. So there's a little cliffhanger for you. Okay, we're going to continue the weirdness with the soundtrack for Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. This is obviously the Park Chan-wook film. This score was created by the Boo Project? Boo? I don't know. It was sort of a bit of a collective. He sort of brought people together. It's a very, very strange score. I mean, you have proper jazz. I mean, I hate jazz. There's some proper jazz on this, but it suits the film really well. You have these very sort of pounding drums, this sort of metronomic piano squealing trumpet that is sort of weirdly irritating, but it suits the sort of emotional turmoil that this film has and yet then you go into, this is the most eclectic soundtrack on this entire list, just to say. You have like odd strings with weird sort of low gravelly male moaning, groaning, weird vocal, obviously sung in Korean. Then there are like pop songs. There's like one that sounds proper new wave, new romantic-y sort of odd synthy popness. You have these, there's a lot of accordion on this score. I don't know whether accordions are super popular in Korea or whether it was just an odd choice. But no, there's like a proper sort of pogo-y rock pop tune that has accordion on it. No, I think the thing is, it sounds really weird. It sounds like it shouldn't work at all. And I think perhaps as an album, it's an odd listen, especially if you don't know the film. I think if you played it for someone who hadn't seen the film, they would wonder what on earth is going on in the film. But I think Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is a film that draws in a lot of elements from a lot of different genres. You know, it's got that very black comedy element. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of really quite graphic, horrible violence. And I think the score is often mimicking this shift. Even in some places, there's a very melancholic element to the soundtrack. There's some female vocals that are very soft, very melancholic, very sad, which work. But then you have that sort of chaotic emotional turmoil of the jazzy stuff. You have those more poppy tunes that work as just sort of flavour or as a juxtaposition with the sort of violence on screen, or just the strangeness. Everything has a reason, even if it feels like at first glance it doesn't. I think it's a lot stranger hearing it outside of the film than it is in the film, because I don't think you notice actually how bizarre it all is in the film. But that's because the film's very bizarre. No, also these versions are very worth checking out if you can get hold of them. They did the whole rest of the Vengeance trilogy. They're lovely pressings. I very nearly picked Old Boy, but this is really one of the most unique soundtracks out there. I can't do it justice. I did have a look. There's not much of it on YouTube, so it's not the easiest thing to find to listen to. But if you can track down one of these, I definitely recommend it. It's a very odd pick. Next on our list of soundtracks is the soundtrack for Shin Godzilla, which is the closest I've got on this list to a pop-scored jukebox soundtrack, because it sort of is, but it also has a bunch of original stuff, and even if it was just the pop score stuff, it would be an incredibly bizarre way of doing a pop score soundtrack. Perhaps I'll do a video on pop score soundtracks down the line, but for now, you're stuck with this one. This score mashes together a bunch of different Godzilla cuts from Akira Ifube, who did the original score. It's like, a lot of the time, it's different renditions of the key Godzilla theme. I think there's a version from King Kong vs. Godzilla, from Terror of Mechagodzilla, which is a really awesome slowed down version. It's basically just a greatest hits. Oh, and there's some music from Battle from Outer Space as well. All of these are of varying sound quality. The stuff from the original film sounds awful. But I don't know, it just adds to the strangeness of that film. The rest of the score comes to us from Shiro Sagisu, who did the music for Evangelion, and here both lifts weird remixed versions of some tracks from the Neon Genesis Evangelion soundtrack and composes a bunch of new stuff as well. Obviously, this was directed by the same person that came up with Evangelion, so it has that connection, and I think using the music really does lend that there's a similarity between the two. It's mainly this really awesome drum beat that goes like dum 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 dum. You'll hear that a lot if you watch this film, but it's a very cool bit of music. And there's lots of different riffs on it. There's like one with like some sort of funky, almost sambery drumming, one with like chugging electric guitar. And it does help build as the film goes on. But I really like the original stuff in this as well. It's very, very epic. I think it's Persecution of the Masses is the track that is dedicated to Godzilla. There's like a human equivalent as well. But I mean, that opening track is so operatic. It has these very low vocals and just really builds an epic picture of what the film's like. And I think generally, it's this sort of... like, none of these things should ever go together. It's so bizarre how they've been sort of sandwiched in with one another. But it somehow works. Like, I can't imagine the film sounding any other way. And I think, you know, this is a film that... I think having the old Akira Ifugao music really makes it feel like Godzilla, because there are a bunch of elements that feel very new and very different. So I think that sort of nails down where it comes from. I mean, the film even opens with the old footsteps. But I think having the Evangelion music and all of the new stuff sort of brings it much more into a modern era and makes it feel newer than a lot of the stuff that was in the Millennium series. So I think the score does exactly what Shin Godzilla does. It maintains a classic feel whilst really making it feel new and modern. And yeah, the score does the exact same thing. And it's fantastic. And someone really needs to put it out physically. Please. Continuing our journey into the strange and weird and wonderful world of soundtracks, we're going with Possum, the score for the Matthew Holness film that was created by the wonderful Radiophonic Workshop. It's... Right, okay. So, Radiophonic Workshop, that was the first thing I heard about Possum. That was the thing that made me interested. I was like, okay, that score's going to be amazing. If you like the Radiophonic Workshop, who, if you don't know, did like all the old BBC stuff for like Doctor Who, basically brought electronic music into the homes of Britain. Super important for that reason. This is what you are hoping for if you know that sort of stuff. It is very, very strange, bizarre electronic sounds. There are so many points where there'll be a noise on the soundtrack and you will go, what on earth just made that? And it's very disconcerting. It's a very, very creepy film that uses a lot of elements visually from sort of British TV. So having the Radiophonic Workshop do it is a perfect sort of marriage of visual and sound, auditory and visual, whatever words you wish to use. But as much as I love the weird discordant analogue sounds that they make, the thing that's more noticeable in this is the more sort of organic sounds rather than the more synthetic sounds. There's a lot of flute and some strings and a sort of detuned piano that in one way sort of invoke... There's a lot of storytelling that goes on in Possum, and they have that sort of storybook quality because they're sounds that you sort of think of with fairy tales and stuff like that. But it also ties it nicely in with all of those older TV shows. The flutes made me think of the Woman in Black score that I talked about on the video a couple of weeks ago. It's just all so creepy. It really gets under... It's a film that genuinely does, and I think it's because the soundtrack is just... It reminds you... I think we're at a point where a lot of people that will remember these sort of sounds were children when they first heard them, I was a child when I first heard them because I was interested in them because my parents had a connection with them, and I think it's just got this element of sort of childhood horror is tied up in these sort of sounds that are on the Possum soundtrack, and I think that thematically ties up really well with the film, but it's that sort of base instinctive terror that comes with hearing those sounds. I think that's really... This isn't selling it something you want to listen to, but I would highly recommend listening to it. Also, if you get the album, it's got a bunch of like bonus tracks, loads of stuff that didn't make it into the film. So if you're a Radiophonic Workshop fan, it's definitely worth getting. And I'm pretty sure some of the stuff that's on this soundtrack is old stuff that was repurposed. I'm pretty sure there's some like Delia Derbyshire stuff on here. So, I mean, if you are a fan of Radiophonic Workshop, this definitely should be getting in your ears. And that brings me to the soundtrack for Monos. This is fantastically odd. Mika Levy did the score for this. You will probably know her name for doing Under the Skin, which is again a very, very strange score, which is probably a more famous score, but I think Monos is a much more interesting one. It's predominantly a mixture. It's very similar to Possum in that it's a mixture of organic sounds and synthetic sounds. The key repetitive theme of Monos as a score is this whistling, this repeated sort of bird call done as a whistle, and this is on multiple tracks throughout, and so you start off with this sort of very recognisable human sound that is then followed by this strange reverberating synthesizer, and it perfectly mirrors how the film plays out. If you don't know, it's about a bunch of child soldiers in a jungle. So you have this very sort of human element, this very natural element of like the jungle, and then you have soldiers, war, which is more sort of shown in that synthetic synthesizer sound. But it's how the two interplay. It's that you have these two very disparate elements. It's similarly, there are other sort of whistling, blowing sounds, more sort of high-pitched whistles and flutes, I presume. But then you have like sounds like someone blowing across the top of a bottle, and that's mixed again with like these strings that have been electronified in very much the way that they are in something like Under the Skin. And it's just, you always have this sort of wrong-footed, it doesn't feel right. I mean, there's one track just has random high-pitched ping noises, sort of, which catch you out and almost make you jump, even when you're just listening to the vinyl. It's weird. And the key thing, actually, even, especially you notice it, I think, when you listen to it on vinyl, there's a lot of echo, and there's a lot of sounds coming in and they fade out. And they fade out to complete silence. It's a score that is as much... is more powerful because its use of silence than it is when it's using up, because the silence sort of bolsters the strangeness of the sounds, because you're almost left with time to think, what made that? Where did that come from? And it's also, because you have that echo, it sounds like something sort of happening further in the jungle, or, you know, it's happening far away, but it's getting closer, or it's creeping up, or it's disappearing. And I think that it just builds a world around your ears. It's really, if you don't listen to any of the other ones that I've discussed, Monos is definitely worth just listening to go, this is how someone scored a film. No, Mika Levy's a genius, and I cannot wait to see what she does next. But yeah, Monos is brilliant. It's a really good film as well, actually. Go and watch the film. So, as you will notice, everything that we've done so far is movie-based. So I thought we ought to do a TV one. And what's more weird, I thought we ought to do a TV documentary, because I just thought documentaries must be a really hard thing to score. And one of my favourite scores for a documentary is the Vietnam War, done by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. It's a fantastic score. It really is. It's an 18-hour-long documentary. It's fantastic. Watch it if you haven't. If you have any interest in what happened in Vietnam, it's well worth your time. It's one of the most in-depth documentaries I've ever seen. Anyway, back to the score. I think one of the greatest things about how Trent and Atticus work is that they are able to make things that should be static or sort of stuffy or bland or boring. They have a brilliant way of making them feel exciting. If you think of something like The Social Network, that's a film about people typing predominantly and people arguing about legal stuff. And yet it feels propulsive and like things are happening because of the score. And the Vietnam War is very much a similar thing. Obviously, they are at times scoring, fantastic footage that was captured at the time that is full of emotion, and they managed to harness that. They managed to make it feel dark and depressing and harrowing, and you really get a sense that this was a horrible atrocity that was happening, really. And I think that's because they're masters of that sort of thing. But it's how they manage to score moments that are like you're listening to someone talk and you're looking at pictures of old men sat in a room talking, and yet it feels interesting and engaging and exciting. And I don't know how they do it, but they can, and they do. It works really, really well. I mean, the documentary is full of pop music from the time, and also it's a greatest hits collection of other Trent and Atticus stuff. There's stuff from Social Networks in there, stuff from Ghosts by Nini's in there. There's some other Nine Inch Nails stuff, I think. But it's the score itself. I mean, it's on many vinyl. If you can see, I can't remember. I think it's like 4 vinyl, 3 or 4. There's a lot of music here, and it's all really good. Because there's some, there's a lot of the traditional Trent and Atticus stuff, the piano, the sort of echoey piano, haunting synthesizers, but there's some really quite sort of propulsive, beats going on, really interesting sort of arpeggiated synths. There's some more guitar stuff that is proper nin stuff. It's a fantastic soundtrack. I mean, well, they all are, but no, just manages to capture a mood, and like I said, it just makes things feel fresh and exciting. There are times when, again, you're watching footage, you might be even watching the same footage a couple of times in the documentary, or seeing iconic photos that you know so well, and they are made fresh by the score, because you're looking at them through a more modern lens, because the soundtrack is incredibly modern sounding. It just creates that sort of fresh, exciting, you're looking at things in a new perspective. Yeah, it's the perfect way to score a documentary, really. No, I can't recommend listening to that enough. So, for our final soundtrack, we're going into the world of video games with Silent Hill 2, because I think soundtracks for Silent Hill are hugely influential on me. I think they're some of the best soundtracks for anything ever, hence why they're on this list. This was a very close-knit call between Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3, because I love the beats on 3. 3 has some fantastic sort of hip-hop, trip-hop beats, but 2 is a really important soundtrack, because for me, Silent Hill 2 is one of the points where video games grow up, because they go into cinematic, emotional storytelling with Silent Hill 2, and the score is a huge part of that. Akira Yamaoka created one of the most sort of emotive scores for a video game ever. It's a huge step up from the first one, which was pretty one note, had a lot of just harsh industrial noise, which is great, but there is so much in the soundtrack for 2. You have the melancholic piano that is beautifully sad. You have strange oddities that sort of invoke a sort of David Lynch, Twin Peaksy vibe, something like Alone in the Town, with its sort of slow drum beat, strange warbly synths with piano, and then you have horrible ambience that's just, it's so hard to put your finger on what it is. It's just creeping ominous dread behind you that you can't put your finger on, which is a huge thing for Silent Hill. So much of it is about looking at things and going, I don't actually know what that is. And it sounds like that too. But it can move into being incredibly intense or operatic in something like, I think it's Betrayal is very sort of operatic sort of vocals and these crushing, sort of echoing, reverberating drums, and it's a fantastic soundtrack to listen to. Weirdly, the tracks are in a bizarre order as a soundtrack. They don't tell the story perhaps quite as I would like them to, because there's some random heavy metal tracks that they decided to use for the credits. Those are a bit strange, but I think it just creates such a sense of world, and a world that you cannot put your finger on. And I just think it's so beautifully varied, and I don't know, there's just an odd quality to it. It's one of those things, you can hear a soundtrack for Silent Hill and within seconds you go, that's Silent Hill. And I think that soundtrack, despite the fact that I heard it quite late in my gaming life, well, it's from 2001, it doesn't sound like it's aged at all. Anyway, there are sounds, there are chords or notes or synthesizer sounds that I hear on that soundtrack, and I've heard them in other songs, and they instantly, if they're in another song, they're instantly overwritten, because I just go, that's from Silent Hill. Most of those I go, that's from Silent Hill too, because it's such a good score. And I do think it genuinely changed the landscape for video game music. And, I mean, half the songs are in the Silent Hill film, and they work really well there too. So, it's a brilliant score. As were all of these, in my opinion. So yeah, those are 10 scores that I absolutely love. 10 soundtracks, whatever word you wish to use for them. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this. I have plenty of soundtracks to discuss with you. This could have easily, there were so many of these, like I said, that I was arguing with myself. I changed them at the last minute actually. There were a few that weren't going to be on here, and then I quickly rewrote it this morning after writing it all yesterday. So yeah, I'll probably be disappointed with this list after I've done. But yeah, I'd happily do this again. So let me know in the comments if you'd like me to. Like and subscribe so you don't miss any more videos. And I shall see you next time.